There are also a number of incentives that national governments can set to support the take-up of electric vehicles in the paratransit industry. That include, for example, financial incentives, technical incentives, and social incentives. And here the idea is, of course, to connect the three to have a favorable environment for the transition in that. So the financial incentives that national governments provide include funding for the initial procurement, for example, of vehicles, support for the business development, improving services. That of course helps to test the viability of the vehicles, in particular when there is still a significant price gap between an electric vehicle and a conventional one. And then, of course, similarly, the tax system can be quite relevant. So that goes for the operations. So that includes the staff and their taxes, the services that are being provided and how they are taxed. But then, of course, also when it comes to the development of the vehicle, offering tax reductions for the import of the vehicle itself or for individual parts. Here we see sometimes quite a bit of a difference that in some countries where there are already import tax reductions for the complete electric vehicle, but where it's still trickier to import certain parts of the vehicle, which of course hamper the opportunities to develop a successful vehicle development business in the country. For bigger demonstrations of e-paratransit solutions, grants can be quite helpful and enabling, so that, for example, a consortium of, for example, a city government, a public transport operator, a vehicle provider, and a service provider would team up together, receiving a grant from a national government to test the integration of vehicles and services in a real-life operation. That could be part, for example, of a research or innovation project where those partners participate to test the viability, but also to help bridging the gaps between different objectives of different actors. And then, of course, for the scale-up of those concepts, for the wider rollout, it can be very helpful and enabling to provide low-interest loans to companies that would like to scale up the electrification of their fleet. And here national governments can also play a very important role. Similarly, the establishment of public-private partnerships can be quite helpful. So this could be, for example, a follow-up of the case that we just discussed. So a innovation project where co-development partners have identified certain solutions, have validated them, and that could be then taken further in a much broader scale. And here, of course, the focus also would be for the integration of classical public transport solutions with higher capacities, with buses and metros, and paratransit providers with smaller types of vehicles, so that they are providing complementary services that are closely integrated. And here a national government can set a setup for this and a framework for this with public-private partnerships, so that the services are improved to a mutual benefit. And then, of course, for certain services that may be harder to manage economically, for example, that paratransit providers would offer. So in lower density areas, for example, where high capacity public transport would not be economically viable, subsidies could be provided to keep the fares affordable and provide accessible and affordable last mile connectivity, for example. This could include also vouchers for certain user groups who could then access e-paratransit services. On the technical incentives, there are a number of activities that national governments can undertake to support. So, of course, technical training and support can help enhancing the skills and the knowledge of paratransit providers who are going electric. Of course, there are a number of technological improvements that can be supported directly by national governments with certain types of technologies, for example, such as tracking and localization, communication tools that can be integrated in vehicles to improve the interoperability, the efficiency of the vehicles and their fleets. And then, of course, there can also be direct support towards maintenance and repair. So this is, of course, key factor with new technologies. Here we may not necessarily have a sufficient net of maintenance and repair service stations, so there may be a need for national governments to come in to provide those services to again ensure the reliability and safety of the vehicles and the efficiency of their operations. There are also a number of elements that go more into the licensing and permitting. So here national governments can have to take also a role that goes, let's say, between the incentives and the regulatory environment. So making the access to licenses easier, for example, can be quite a helpful tool to make the electric vehicles more attractive. So that could be, for example, easier access to service licenses or to licenses to enter certain parts of the city, for example, that may not be accessible for diesel-powered vehicles, for example. And then, of course, integrating those vehicles with the devices that we just talked about into an intelligent transport management system could be quite helpful to increase the efficiency of the overall services, to make it more attractive for users, to have services being integrated and more reliable. And that can also then feed back to certain mobility applications that users can use to schedule a trip, to book a trip, to pay for a trip. And of course, all of that heavily relies on an infrastructure that is also being provided by a national government with regard to the physical and the digital infrastructure. So creating a local ecosystem that is enabling and supporting is quite important, that focuses not just on the take-up but also on the maintenance of the vehicles is a critical factor. And here, of course, tools to support the piloting are the first step to break through, but they would then also need to be sustained with regard to scale-up opportunities and maintenance. And research and development can play a very important role in making this all happen and test the viability. Here, of course, also nationally funded academic institutions will come in to help and support, to promote the innovation and improve the technological advancements. On the social side of things, there are a number of factors that are of key importance for national governments. Here, of course, the job creation element within the development of electric vehicles domestically, so the production of, for example, electric three-wheelers for e-paratransit solutions is one key job creation factor, and then of course the services themselves, so how they are used. That's quite an important key role for these both bits on the vehicles and the services side of things. And of course then partnering with local businesses to improve their viability and their economic performance is a key enabling factor to that, for them to then be able to create jobs. And of course, nice elements to improve the visibility of companies could be recognition through awards, etc. And supporting that with services that also make sure that mobility solutions are provided for all, round up the social services from that perspective. And with that wider community engagement, we can also try to ensure from the national government's perspective that e-paratransit solutions are being perceived positively, contributing to the community, contributing to boosting incomes, to improving air quality, noise, accessibility, affordability of mobility solutions. Here, of course, national governments and academic institutions supported by national governments can play an important role to, for example, carry out services, facilitate stakeholder discussions, and community engagement, so that the community also has the reflection on their objectives and their perspectives are being taken into account. And then similarly, of course, offering insurance schemes for health, unemployment, etc., are important as enabling factors to go into new jobs and new businesses. And of course, similarly, ensuring a stable tariff and monitoring is quite important as well for the supervision and the gain of trust of users.